Hello, it's our great pleasure to introduce Dr. Blyth Bell. He spent an hour with us last week because this year is the return of the Open Championship to Royal Liverpool. And he did an incredible job showing us the many firsts of the club and a lot of discussion about the various tournaments that were there and held, the many fine champions. But our viewers wanted to see more. So Blyth is going to take us into the clubhouse and the redesign of the some of the main trophy cases that are there at the club. So Dr. Bell, take it away.
Many thanks, George. I was tasked last year with redoing our trophy cabinets at Hoylake, and this was my winter job. This was my winter project, and it was really just to sort of show some of the trials and tribulations I went through when doing this, and also to show off some of our best medalry and trophies. So the process is actually more interesting than, well, everything's interesting, but the process and the learning curve that I went through, those members that have their own collections and look at ways in which to display them may pick up some information that might be helpful along the way. Your best stuff has to be shown off to its best advantage. So I hope you find it interesting anyway. First slide, George. So basically, we had two main trophy cabinets in the downstairs entrance hall at Royal Liverpool Golf Club Hoylake, and one big one, this one here. And the main sort of pushback we got from the members was, why do you want to change it? You know, it's perfectly good as it is, and it's admired by the world of golf, and everyone thinks we're fantastic, and and it is fantastic. But this cabinet sort of evolved maybe over 20 years, 25 years, and it had evolved in a sort of piecemeal way. And the central part of the cabinet, you know, had all our crown jewels and all the big trophies and medals from the beginning of the club, and then on Hilton. The rest of it was a little bit sort of piecemeal bric-a-brac. Something ended up there that hadn't, you know, shouldn't really be there, and there wasn't any theme to it. So it was also very poorly lit. The labeling was not that great. There were a couple of misspellings. But basically the presentation was from the 1990s, and we really wanted it to look like something that had taken advantage of newer technology and better graphics and just modernized, really. And we still wanted to keep the feel of, you know, a club that's 150 years old. So we ended up actually showing less, but we showed it to better effect. The presentation is much improved, although I would say that because I did it, but it took a while. It was a big project. It was a steep learning curve for me, although I've been sort of involved with the heritage for over 30 years, that, you know, things have moved on, and, you know, what was acceptable 20 or 30 years ago is no longer acceptable. And if you go to a modern sports museum, you can see the difference. You know, the displays are fantastic, they're wonderful, they're awe-inspiring. And so we decided to take a bit of a punt and buy some new cabinets. So here they are, and this is the story. So that's our main cabinet. Next slide, George. And our other cabinet, this is a smaller cabinet at the other side of our entrance in the hallway, and again, that was a sort of bric-a-brac cabinet that has lots of really quite interesting things in it, but lots of stuff that really isn't that rare or that interesting. The club, we had clubs from Rory and Tiger and Peter Thompson's 3-wood and things. Everything was a little bit higgledy-piggledy, and it was out of time. It really didn't have a message. So what I did was I thought, well, the crown jewels are in the other cabinet that you've just seen, and we thought, well, why don't we turn this into a temporary cabinet, a cabinet that has shelves in it that move, paneling that can change, lighting you can alter. So basically, this cabinet was very basic when we repurposed it and redesigned it, and so we can do anything with this cabinet we want. And after this year's Open Championship at Hoylake, which actually starts next week, and we're very excited but very anxious, it will be repurposed. And so the next event, when we have our next amateur championship or our next English championship or whatever, we can repurpose this whole case very, very easily without hardly any expense to house that particular event. We had the Walker Cup in this case when we hosted the Walker Cup in 2019, which is a massive trophy, and it took up the whole case. But that's another story. So next image, George. Okay, so this is our 13th Open Championship, and this involved the process sort of started with, well, what do you do when you don't really know what you're doing? And well, you always ask somebody. And so I asked around various places, and who do you use to make your cabinets? And they were very helpful in St Andrews, and they had a company from Yorkshire called Glasshouse. I don't think they've done anything in the US. They do a lot in Europe, and they've been going for a while, and they are very reputable. They come with good reviews, and so we asked them, and we got a quote, and they came up with quite a big number, to be honest. But we thought, well, if we're only doing it every 20 or 30 years, you want to do properly. So we engaged Glasshouse, and they were lovely to work with, and we fiddled about with dimensions of the cases and things like that. And then they said, well, I said, well, what's the next move? And they said, well, have you designed your case? You designed what you want. I said, well, I know what I want to put in it, basically, but I've no idea how to start, thinking about mounting, lighting, things like that. And so we had a chat about it in the club, and it soon became clear that we needed a designer, as a sort of someone who makes a living out of designing the interiors of these cases. So we, on the recommendation of a couple of people again, we came upon this company, a husband and wife team who'd worked a lot with Glasshouse, and they were fantastic, actually. So we then had to work out what was to go in the cabinets and how we were to present it and label it, and then we came on to the graphics. And one of the design team was a graphic designer, and he came up with lots and lots of options. And we eventually, this is for our temporary case, which I thought, well, if you're having the Open this year, you might as well have an Open Championship, an Open Championship case. So for this year, it will be about the Open Championship. So we had to get these panels organized with the imaging and the text and everything. And it was really like doing a book in many ways. It was like doing a page of a book. So you get the images and the text to the designer, and you spell check it, and you edit it, and you get it to the right size so that it fits in the panel. And he comes up with various options. So if you've got 13 Open champions, sorry, 12 Open champions until next week, and you've got to put them in a panel, that's too many. So who do you leave out? It was a very difficult decision, and some members have their favorite champion, and I've had some flack over leaving out Roberto Di Vincenzo, and I'd say, well, Roberto only won one major. He can't be the, we don't need Roberto because the rest of them are multiple major champions, and we don't want a single major winner as romantically linked as they are to the memory of Roberto Di Vincenzo. So we came up with Woods and McIlroy and Bobby Jones, of course, Harold Hilton, our first Open champion and amateur member, and the 5-time winner, Peter Thompson. So that's what we came up with. That's the panel that goes in the back of the Open Championship cabinet. Next slide, George. So then he came up with, what else do you want to put in the cabinet? Well, we've got all the programs from 1930. We could put those in. That's cheap as chips, and well, we've got it, and it's quite interesting. It's original. It's quite nice, and we've got some clubs from those champions. Although I have to admit that the J.H. Taylor and Arnold Massey clubs may not have been used in their Open Championship victories, but they are of their particular players. So, and I don't for a minute think that Tiger's 2-iron was the one he used for his victory in the 2006 Open Championship, but we can always say that it may well have been used, or it was said to have been used. But Tiger did give it to us anyway, so it's from Tiger's collection, and it's now telling the story of the way he plotted his way around the links in 2006. So everything's pretty authentic. So we just went on. I changed the coloring, make it look a little bit better. Navy dark blue is much better than sort of off-color red. It looks a little bit more regal. But this is a very simple case. And next slide, George. And that's it, really. It's not a great picture. I'm sorry, that was taken on my phone, but you can see the programs and the clubs and the panel, the story of the Open Championship at Hoylake. Okay, so in my time on Heritage at Royal Liverpool, I've never been keen on replicas or fakes. And someone said, "Oh, we could get a replica of the Amateur Championship trophy." I thought, it's massive. I said, replicas are replicas. And, oh, we could get a replica of this, that, and the other. And I said, well, we're authentic. Anyway, I succumbed as far as the Open Championship trophy was concerned. And I thought, really, you can't have an Open Championship cabinet without an Open Championship trophy. So I tried in vain to get one on loan for the year. There are several Open Championship trophies. There is one original Open Championship trophy, but the Open Championship trophy has its own secretary, and it was booked up for most of the year, and I couldn't get one on loan for long enough to make it possible. So we took the plunge and bought a replica through the R&A. There is a process. There are various stipulations that come with that process, as far as display and how you display it and how you describe it and things like that. And you do sign an agreement, which is absolutely fine. So we are proud to have a replica of the Open Championship trophy, the Claret Jug, which is the centerpiece of the Open Championship trophy cabinet. And that's just a close-up of the programs. So that's Tiger. In the 2006 Open, he was the holder. He'd won the 2005 championship at St Andrews. So this is a picture of him in 2005 on the front of the 2006 program. And the one on the one next is in 1967, and it's a picture of Bobby Jones, an oil picture that we have hanging in the club. It's a wondrous picture by a local artist. He was one of the best portrait artists of his time. He sat for that oil painting, or he sat for the sketch at Wallasey Golf Club on the eve of the 1930 Open Championship, and he was pleasantly refreshed with a scotch and soda. So that's in 1967, and next to that's a 1930 very famous event, the 1930 Open Championship. And we have golf balls, Roberto Di Vincenzo, Peter Thompson, and Fred Daly. And the most interesting, I don't think golf balls are particularly interesting, but the interesting thing about these golf balls is that they're all Dunlop 65 4s. So all these champions played their final round with, or certainly played during the championship with a Dunlop 65 4. And in my youth, if I'd known how lucky that ball was, I would have played it all the time. But anyway, that's the Open Championship case. You know, that was the small job, the small temporary cabinet. But next slide, Joe. Okay, so this is real McCoy here. This is the redone large trophy cabinet, and this is where all the real riches are positioned. So I kept the sort of previous scheme a little bit, and so we've got a John Ball panel, a Harold Hilton panel, and I felt for some time that the women's golf had been a little bit neglected at Hoylake, and you know, everyone's keen to be inclusive as they can, and I thought it was underrepresented, and we had some memorable ladies events, women's events. We had some champions from the past. So our first ladies amateur championship, as it was then called, was 1896. And we had a fantastic picture of, which you get a close-up of later, of the particular champion. We've got Hilton on the other side with his medals, and with Hilton and Ball, there was another great golfer called Jack Graham, and they were a sort of golfing dynasty at Hoylake. So there were two brothers and a sister who went on to do fantastic things. So I thought they merited with their medals you know, a bit of the cabinet for themselves. The other one, the central cabinet, I like pretty much. We improved the display and the way things are presented, but these are mainly the club medals and trophies. They go back to a lot of them go back to the 1870s when the club was making great strides and going forwards, and it's a testament to the wealth of these Victorian men that traded from the city of Liverpool. They were extravagant. They wanted, you know, they made statements, as the Victorians did in general, and when they did something, they did it properly, and they did it with large S. So so 3 or 4 of those early trophies are just wondrous, the glittering prizes of the club. So so everything's there. Next slide, please, Joe. So with the graphic design, this is an interesting thing. So if there is a sort of optimum number of words you have when you're doing a panel for a museum piece or a painting or whatever, and once you get beyond 200 words, people lose interest. So telling, you know, a story in 200 words, there's actually more than 200 words there. Like, I think there's just under 300 words, but telling the story of a man who books have been written about, who had a golf history spanning 40 years, and trimming it down to 250 words is an absolute difficult thing to do. So luckily, I've got a good friend at the club who's a retired professor of English, and he's a mad keen golfer, and he's helped me with some of the projects in the past, and he's pretty ruthless with his editing. So I came up with the text and I took it to my friend Andrew, and he completely demolished it and cut it down, and I took it back to the designer, and the designer said, well, it's still too long. I took and I cut some more. So it was a trimming process to get it down to a size that would be, hold people's interest and tell the main story, which was a very interesting exercise really for me. Using 2 words instead of 4 words and trying to keep it the same was very difficult really. So this is the panel we came up with for John Ball, and we'd already worked out what pieces of memorabilia were going to go in with that particular cabinet. So we have the outline here of his bronze statuette, that's his swing, and his 1890 Open Championship medal and his 1890 Amateur Championship medal, because he won them both in the same year. And we also had a space at the bottom for some of his other medals. Sadly, most of his medals, he left the Open and Amateur medals of 1890 to the club in his will, but the rest of them have been scattered to the wind, and we've no idea where they are. But they will turn up one day somewhere if they haven't been melted down. But we've got the main ones, the Open and the Amateur of 1890. Next slide, George. Okay, so we had to do the same thing with Harold Hilton, and again, trying to keep it as tight and as descriptive, and I wanted to avoid a list. It was pretty difficult. The text has to be big enough for people to read. Too small and they can't read it. So again, it's like fitting a quart into a pint pot. It's trying to get as much on the page as is reasonable, and it has to be readable. It has to look well. It has to. You have to get the spelling right. Your punctuation has to be perfect. So it's a laborious sort of thing to do. But any of you that have written stuff or have gone through this process, and it's the worst bit of any project. And you always find out near the end that you've completely messed something up, and you want to change it at the last minute, and the designer's pulling his hair out, and there's always a deadline. And but we hit our deadline, which was good. So next slide, George. Okay, so again, it's not a great picture, but this is what came about from the John Ball panel, and these are the medals in situ. And the other thing we had to do was do the labels, and these labels are not straightforward. And you're describing a medal. How do you just differently describe a medal from the medal next to it? You end up trying not to repeat yourself, and how do you, and some of them you get 15 words to do it, and some of them you got enough space for 30 words. So it's just it's like doing a book. It's exactly the same thing really, and again it has to be the right size, and so people can read it, and you don't want to bore them rigid with too much information. So that's what we came up with John Ball. And in the flesh, that picture really doesn't do it justice, but in the flesh, it's fantastic. But the raw materials are so good, you couldn't really mess up with the medalry that we've got. But next slide, please, George. Okay, and that's Hilton. This is, it may interest people, a little bit more interesting to people from the US, but So we have these these medals are sort of suspended in midair, rather than have them sort of, they are special medals. So they're sort of suspended in midair with little sort of steel brackets, tiny little steel brackets that sort of, have them, just looking right at you. And these are all bespoke for the individual medal. And our designer was brilliant. She took, to the millimeter. She measured everything so that the heights would be right, and they'd be in the right position in the case when the cabinet company came to do it. And all the planning and everything, just it went really well towards the end. But it took them 2 days to do both cabinets. That's Hilton's ball that he used in 1911 to win the 1911 Amateur Championship, and the ones, the freestanding ones, Open Championship medal of 1892, then the Open Championship medal of 1897, and then the US Amateur Championship of 1911. So yeah, that's great, George. Perfect. Okay, so we've Muirfield, Hoylake 1897, our first Open, and the 1911 US Amateur Championship at Appowamus, which is so people always ask, the big question in the history of golf is who is the better player, Hilton or Ball, and I think they're about equal, really. Who would I have liked to play with most? I would have liked to play with John Ball for sure. Who would you want to hold a 4-foot putt for your life? Well, you'd want Harold Hilton to do that. But they were very different. Hilton's achievements may have just eclipsed Ball's, but they were both huge heroes and hugely influential in the early days of golf at Hoylake and amateur golf in the UK in general. But next slide, Joe. Okay, so this is Amy Pascoe. So Amy Pascoe, I think this is a fantastic picture. This is from the Surrey History Museum gave us permission to reprint this. And this is a picture of Amy Pascoe in 1896, following her ladies amateur championship win at Hoylake in 1896. And I think it's lovely. We've hosted the Curtis Cup. We hosted interestingly, we hosted the Women's British Open in 2012, and I happened to be captain of the club that year, so I had great contact with everything that went on in that championship. And the weather was absolutely awful, and Jae Shin, little Korean golfer, she played amazingly well and won the championship by about 9 shots in a hurricane. And interestingly, she finished second at the weekend, joint second at Pebble Beach in the women's Open at Pebble Beach at the weekend. So that's 11 years ago, and she doesn't play much now, but she's still playing some good golf. But some of the medals there are from Molly Graham, and Molly Graham is the sister of Jack Graham and Alan Graham. She won the ladies amateur championship in 1901 at Aberdyfi in Wales, the only time it's ever been held there. And she was also three-time Scottish amateur ladies finalist, and she only won it once, sadly. But so she was a Scottish champion and a British champion, and she was a great all-round sportswoman. But so the ladies in the club the women in the club are delighted that they are now represented properly in the body of the Kirk in our club at Hoylake. But Next slide, George. Okay, so last panel is the Graham family, and I mentioned them earlier, and Jack Graham never won an amateur championship. He had very many good finishes in the Open. Yeah, I think he had about 3 top 10s in the Open Championship, and he lost in the semi-finals of the amateur championship on 5 occasions. Sadly, he went off to World War I, and he was killed at the Battle of Hooge, fighting with the Liverpool Scottish Regiment. He always represented Scotland because of his Scottish heritage, but he was a proud Scot. His brother, Alan Graham, was also a player of note. And the club that you see bottom right, it's a sort of brass putter. Could you close up on that, George? Or the little putter we've got on the right there. Could we get a close up of that? Okay, yeah. Okay. Again, sorry, it's not the perfect image, but so in 1921, Alan Graham played an amateur championship here, and he, on the way to the final, he defeated a young bouncy American 19-year-old called Bobby Jones, and it was Bobby Jones's first visit to Hoylake, his first visit to the UK, and Alan Graham battered him. He beat him about 5-4, and Bobby Jones lamented that this genial tall man from Hoylake thoroughly beat him to death with a queer brass putter. And this is the queer brass putter that Alan Graham beat Bobby Jones with. And he went into the final, and Alan Graham lost in the final, and he was destroyed really by Willie Hunter. And Willie Hunter went over to America. He was originally from Kent, and Willie Hunter went over to America and became quite a successful tournament professional there in the mid to late 20s. But next one, George. Are we done?
Yeah, I think that'll do it.
Okay. Well, that's the story of our trophy cabinets at Hoylake, and the story of how we went about modernizing them, improving them, and it was a labor of love, but it was a winter project, and you can't play golf in the long winter nights, so it was the ideal project to keep me occupied in the winter time. But it's not straightforward, but it's always good to learn new skills. So yeah, it was great fun. Great fun. So thanks again, George. If anyone wants to contact me or needs any more information, don't hesitate to do so. I've enjoyed being with you.
Blyth, congratulations is what I can say. I mean, those displays are absolutely stunning. I mean, that process is fascinating. I learned a lot of things about the claret jug, how you get one, not anybody, and and more about those medals. I mean, they are just spectacular. I mean, such a rich history you have at that course with the famous players and the artifacts and the ones you aren't even showing. So, I mean, just beautiful. So I really enjoyed it. I know all our viewers will too. So thank you very, very much.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.